Tshepo Matsebaplane discusses reputational damage.
So let's get to this story now. So the ANC has distanced itself from a woman's unruly behavior on a FlySAF air flight from Durban to Cape Town. The woman claimed to be a member of the party. Now, videos captured by fellow passengers of the incident on Boxing Day have been widely circulated on social media. In one of them, the obviously intoxicated woman is seen arguing with flight attendants and demanding to be served a drink. The party has initiated investigations into whether she is a member. Meanwhile, FlySAF Air says the woman was handed over to police when the plane landed in Cape Town. The SABC has noted the incident with concern and confirmed the individual in the footage is one of its employees. The public broadcaster says it will use internal procedures to manage the matter. All right, but for a look at some of the reputational damage this incident will have for both the woman and her employer, we are now joined by Tshepo Matsebaplane, who's Managing Director of Reputation First Group. Tshepo, a good afternoon to you. Thank you so much. I mean, the country really on social media abuzz talking about this incident. But I want to do this, Tshepo, if you'll allow us. For those that haven't seen that video, let's give you a quick look and an opportunity to listen a little bit to what happened on that flight.
Pardon my family and let's move on. Okay. She has no rights. Okay. No rights. Black people in this country have a problem of shutting up. But if I was white, then it would be the Thank you. Yes.
And there are so many of these clips, Tshepo, circulating on social media because the incident, and I imagine you've seen it as well, recorded on cell phone footage from so many different angles because of the amount of passengers that also took out their phones to record it. But your initial thoughts, as a reputation expert watching this video, first thought that came to mind?
Yeah, I mean, when I saw this, I saw a classic case of an emotionally charged conversation and also an environment where the situation suggests that alcohol was involved. The verbal altercation suggests that the discussion was actually about alcohol. There are other factors that came into the picture, including issues around racism, which are sensitive in nature, but also insulting crew on duty in a flight that is in motion. I felt really, really sorry for all involved, especially the individual female person that was involved. Of course, none of us have got the full facts from beginning to end, but at least peripheral information that you see suggests that there were unbecoming behavior from a specific individual that may have placed individuals and groups and the entire airline at risk during that particular time, something that could have been avoided. In fact, as I reflected on this, I remember the story of Justin Sacco, who flew from London, I believe it was, or the UK. And by the time they landed in Cape Town, they had already been fired. And that's because they had said, they are going to Africa, and in Africa they hope that not to get AIDS. And information revealed that she had had a couple of glasses of wine before she took that flight to Cape Town. And that's the difficulty that we have as employees, but also as employers, that you have employees that you are associated with by nature of them working for you. And unfortunately, sometimes people think that you can take a break in terms of your values and the values of your employers, that when you are off duty, you can have your own version of values, and when you are on duty, you can have a different version. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. We are all intertwined with our families, ecosystem, our employers, our clients, indeed, those of us who are in independent consulting.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting point that you make, right, around how your version of values does not change when you perhaps are off duty. Here's the reality, though, is that it is the silly season. People are in celebratory mode, and so a lot of those things may very well be forgotten at this time of the year, Tshepo.
Yeah, I mean, look, at a certain level of responsibility, the more senior we are, and especially those of us who work in the area of brand positioning, brand reputation, marketing, ought to be fully aware and try to consistently remind ourselves about how our conduct off and off the pitch may impact the reputation of our employers and indeed the reputation of our families. Sometimes, in fact, senior executives often find themselves having to defend themselves because of the conduct of their children. There's a case in point that happened in Stellenbosch where a student had participated in a racially charged environment, and the father found himself a farmer in the middle of this debacle when he was actually not directly involved, but by association, you end up having to explain yourself, and reputations are impacted. And unfortunately, social media and digital, the footprint that you leave, it has a very long shelf life. It has a very long memory. It doesn't often get, because by the time you delete something that you've tweeted, or by the time that you issue an apology, that information has already been analyzed to a deeper extent than one would have anticipated.
Yeah, Tshepo, what is, I suppose, the impact on the employer in a situation like this?
Yeah, I mean, the employer unfortunately has to now defend themselves. They have to state and distance themselves from the employee in terms of the values that the company lives by and is guided by, and the behavior that employees are supposed to actually conduct in terms of being guided by the values of the organization. Unfortunately, they are going to get digital mentions, so social media mentions, newsroom mentions here in South Africa, and perhaps even on the continent, because here we're talking about a public broadcaster whose responsibility and primary responsibility is fairness, diversity, and inclusion, and in line with South Africa's constitution. It makes the job of the communicators in that environment that much more difficult, because this is their employee, and even though the employer and the broadcaster in this instance did not initiate this mess and this debacle, they find themselves having to defend themselves and demonstrate what remedial action they are going to take to ensure that this does not happen again, but also to retain the good reputation of that specific organization.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that statement that was released by the SABC on the 28th, and it reads as part of it: the SABC regrets this incident and always encourages staff members to uphold the SABC values of respect and integrity in all their interactions. And they mentioned quite a few, and I suppose that really touches on the employer then needing to protect itself. But as we all get into 2025, and I'm speaking now perhaps as corporates, what the lesson should be on even communicating to employees around reputational representation at all times.
Yeah, so all companies, unfortunately for the public broadcaster in this instance, the employee touched on editorial matters, which is the cornerstone of the work that they do. And I think they've addressed that sufficiently, and probably that will continue to be addressed. But for organizations in the public sector, the private sector, it is our responsibility to take the notch about reputation management a little bit higher, because it's not just about social media, because all organizations do have a social media policy. But what we don't often emphasize is that your behavior at a pub, at the church, at next door, at a braai, that behavior could be captured in a social media environment, and that capturing of that situation may result in consequences for the organization, but also importantly, consequences for the individual, wherein you might face disciplinary proceedings and sometimes complex litigation, as we've seen in this specific instance, where an employee may face charges of contravening the aviation rules in South Africa, charges around assault. As you have seen in some of those videos, suggesting that there were actually physical exchanges at some particular point in time. And then there's a reputational risk of one actually finding it very difficult to convince employers that they are an employable candidate and that they should be considered for a job, because these things live long. So organizations ought to continue to educate, emphasize the policies, unpack the policies in a far more friendlier manner, that it is not just about social media, but about the entire reputation of an organization and reputations of the individuals who work in those organizations as well.
Sure. This is your field of work, and I'm just, quite interested to hear if, and I say this perhaps with inverted commas, reputational damage can be reversed.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, all reputations can recover, and we've seen it in the auditing fraternity. The companies that participated in what may be called state capture are back here in South Africa to do some work, even though there are debates. Individuals have recovered that have gone through very, very difficult times, individual brands, including brands such as Tiger Woods. But what is required is transparency from an individual perspective and also organizational perspective, and being honest and dealing with issues head on, not trying to cut corners or to spin, because the day of spinning are long gone. This is an opportunity for recovery, and that recovery happens because there's an acknowledgement and there are remedial actions with regards to what do I do given the circumstances. And sometimes it is best to deal with things head on and take people into confidence. And unfortunately, in this specific instance, it's so complex that you have the public, you have entities that are impacted, you have an airline that was impacted, you have an industry that was impacted. And so taking those people into confidence from an individual perspective might be a good start to think about in terms of what's next towards recovery. But recovery won't be easy and quick.
Yeah, that was, I want to even use the word sobering, but I think a really important sort of lesson we get from you there, and even during the silly season, the importance of being able to protect your reputation at all times. Tshepo, an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Tshepo Matsebaplane is, of course, Managing Director of Reputation First Group.